This episode of the Endpoints of View podcast is brought to you by Sentry Bay, home of the Armored Client, the world's most advanced endpoint protection. Okay, so today we're diving into Middle East cybersecurity. Got a really interesting mix of articles and reports here. And I think what struck me is this sort of paradox, Middle East becoming a serious tech hub, but it's also a huge GE target for cyber attacks. Did you know the average cost of a breach there is over $8 million?
Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic. You're right. It is attracting major players. Oracle, Google, Amazon, they're all setting up shop there. But the rapid digitization, especially in places like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, creates this whole new set of vulnerabilities.
And it's not just about stolen data, right? What are some of the real-world impacts we're talking about here?
Imagine this. A well-coordinated attack takes down a major oil pipeline. Suddenly, global energy prices skyrocket. Economies are thrown into chaos. That's the kind of impact cyber attacks can have in a region so central to the world's energy supply.
Wow, that's a scary thought. So what are the biggest cyber threats they're facing in the Middle East? Is it the same stuff we see everywhere else?
There are definitely some familiar culprits, like phishing and malware. But the motivations behind these attacks can be very different. We're seeing a rise in what's called hacktivism. Groups with political agendas using cyber attacks to disrupt or influence events.
So it's not just about money, it's about power and control.
Absolutely. And it's not just activists. Think about the geopolitical tensions in the region. Rivalries between nations can spill over into cyberspace, leading to espionage, sabotage, even attempts to influence elections.
Yeah, it feels like cybersecurity in the Middle East is almost like a microcosm of global conflict.
In many ways, yes. The energy sector is particularly vulnerable. But finance, healthcare, even stock exchanges, these are all prime targets for cyber attacks with global repercussions.
So what are countries in the Middle East doing to protect themselves?
Well, the good news is they're taking it seriously. The cybersecurity market in the Middle East is predicted to be worth over $24 billion by 2028. They're investing in infrastructure, technology, training, a multi-pronged approach to strengthen their defenses.
But isn't it a bit like playing catch-up? The attackers always seem to be one step ahead.
It's a constant arms race, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But there's a real push in the Middle East to not just react to threats, but to anticipate them. They're building their own expertise, developing sophisticated security solutions, and even starting to invest in offensive cyber capabilities.
Offensive capabilities? You mean like fighting fire with fire?
In a sense, yes. The idea is to make the cost of attacking so high that it deters potential attackers in the first place. But of course, it also requires clear rules of engagement and international cooperation to prevent things from spiraling out of control.
So the big question is it working? Are these efforts enough to actually make the Middle East a safer place online?
That's what we'll explore further as we dive deeper into specific sectors and initiatives. But I think what's important to understand is that cybersecurity in the Middle East isn't just about technology. It's about politics, economics, global power dynamics. It's all interconnected.
And you probably heard that this region has a surprisingly low number of publicly reported cyber incidents. Does that mean they've got it all under control? Or is there something else going on? Let's unpack that next.
Yeah, that low number of publicly reported incidents. It's interesting, isn't it? It might seem like good news on the surface, but there are a few things to consider.
Like what? Are they just really good at keeping things quiet?
Well, there's certainly a cultural element to consider. In some parts of the Middle East, there's a stigma attached to being the victim of a cyber attack. It can be seen as a sign of weakness or incompetence.
So companies might be more likely to sweep incidents under the rug to avoid embarrassment or reputational damage.
Exactly. And then there's the political dimension. Governments might be hesitant to disclose cyber attacks, especially if they involve state-sponsored actors, because it can be seen as an act of aggression or escalation.
So the real number of cyber attacks happening in the Middle East could be much higher than what's being reported.
That's a very real possibility. And it's important to keep that in mind when assessing the overall cybersecurity landscape of the region.
Okay, so even with the limited data we have, what can you tell us about the types of cyber attacks happening in the Middle East? Are there any patterns or trends that stand out?
One trend that's been particularly concerning is the rise of attacks targeting critical infrastructure. The energy sector, as we mentioned earlier, is a prime target, but we're also seeing attacks on water treatment plants, transportation systems, even healthcare facilities.
And these attacks can have a real-world impact, right? Not just disrupting computer systems, but potentially causing physical damage or even loss of life.
Absolutely. A cyber attack on a power grid, for example, could lead to blackouts, affecting hospitals, transportation systems,
Mm.
and essential services. The consequences could be catastrophic.
So who's behind these attacks? Is it just random hackers looking to cause chaos? Or are there more organized groups at play?
It's a mix, really. You have individual hackers, criminal gangs looking for financial gain, hacktivist groups with political agendas, and even state-sponsored actors engaging in cyber espionage or sabotage.
It sounds like a bit of a wild west out there in cyberspace. Is there any way to deter these attacks or hold the perpetrators accountable?
It's a huge challenge. Cyber attacks are often difficult to trace back to their source. And even when you can identify the attacker, it can be incredibly difficult to bring them to justice, especially if they're operating from a different country.
Yeah, it's like a game of cat and mouse, with the attackers always trying to stay one step ahead of the defenders.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And it's why cybersecurity requires a multifaceted approach, combining technology, intelligence gathering, international cooperation, and even legal and diplomatic strategies.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the positive developments happening in the Middle East cybersecurity landscape. You mentioned earlier that countries are investing heavily in cybersecurity. Can you give us some specific examples of what they're doing?
Absolutely. One of the most notable initiatives is the UAE's Dubai cybersecurity strategy, which aims to make Dubai the safest city in cyberspace. They're investing heavily in cybersecurity infrastructure, training programs, and public awareness campaigns.
And what about other countries in the region? Are they following suit?
Yes, definitely. Saudi Arabia has launched its national cybersecurity strategy, which focuses on protecting critical infrastructure, developing local cybersecurity expertise, and fostering innovation in the cybersecurity sector.
So it sounds like there's a real commitment to addressing these challenges at the national level. But what about regional cooperation? Are countries working together to share intelligence and coordinate responses to cyber threats?
There's definitely been progress on that front as well. The Gulf Cooperation Council, and GCC, has established a Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT, to share information and coordinate responses to cyber incidents across the region.
So there's a recognition that cyber threats don't respect borders, and that a coordinated response is essential.
Exactly. And we're also seeing increased collaboration between Middle Eastern countries and international partners, like the United States and the European Union, on cybersecurity issues.
So it sounds like there's a lot happening in the Middle East cybersecurity space, both challenges and opportunities. But what does it all mean for the average person living in the region? How does this impact their daily lives?
That's a great question. Cybersecurity might seem like a distant concern, but it actually touches every aspect of our lives in the digital age.
Okay, give us some examples. How does cybersecurity affect people's everyday lives in the Middle East?
Well, think about all the ways you use the internet on a daily basis. Online banking, shopping, social media, communication, even healthcare. All of these activities rely on a secure and reliable internet infrastructure.
So if that infrastructure is compromised, it can have a ripple effect throughout society.
Exactly. A cyber attack on a bank could disrupt financial transactions. An attack on a hospital could compromise patient data. And an attack on a social media platform could be used to spread misinformation or propaganda.
So cybersecurity isn't just about protecting computer systems. It's about protecting people's lives and livelihoods.
Absolutely. And in a region as interconnected and digitally dependent as the Middle East, cybersecurity is becoming increasingly crucial to ensuring stability, prosperity, and even personal safety.
You know, we were talking about all these high-profile cyber attacks earlier, but it seems like a lot of the threats people face on a daily basis are actually quite mundane. I'm thinking about things like phishing scams and malware infections.
You're right. Those everyday threats can be just as damaging, if not more so, than the headline-grabbing attacks.
So what can people do to protect themselves? It all seems so overwhelming.
There are actually a lot of simple steps people can take to improve their cybersecurity hygiene. Things like using strong passwords, being cautious about clicking on links in emails, keeping their software updated, and backing up their data regularly.
Those are all good tips, but it seems like the bad guys are always coming up with new tricks. How can people stay ahead of the curve?
That's where awareness and education come in. The more people understand about cybersecurity threats and how to protect themselves, the less likely they are to fall victim to these attacks.
So it's not just about technology, it's about empowering people to be smarter and safer online.
Exactly. And that's something that governments, businesses, and individuals all have a role to play in.
Well, you've definitely given us a lot to think about. The Middle East cybersecurity landscape is clearly complex and constantly evolving.
It is. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I
Hmm?
want to focus on one area where this complexity is particularly evident: the energy sector.
As you said before, it's a prime target for cyber attacks. And a successful attack could have major global implications.
Exactly.
Feels like every time we talk about Middle East cybersecurity, energy comes up as this massive vulnerability.
It's not just a perception. It is reality. I mean, think about it. The Middle East holds a huge chunk of the world's oil and gas reserves. Their production impacts prices globally. Political stability. It's a high-stakes target.
Yeah, and we've seen attacks on energy infrastructure in other parts of the world.
Imagine a nation-state actor with the capability to shut down pipelines, refineries,
Mm.
or even cause malfunctions leading to environmental damage. The potential for disruption is massive.
Wow, so it sounds like the stakes are incredibly high. What are energy companies in the Middle East doing to protect themselves from these kinds of threats?
Well, it's a multi-layered approach. First, there's the technical side: strengthening firewalls, intrusion detection systems, all those things. But it goes beyond just tech. They're also focusing on employee training, security audits, even partnering with cybersecurity firms for more specialized expertise.
But isn't it a bit of a losing battle? I mean, the attackers are always coming up with new ways to get in.
It's true. It's a constantly evolving landscape.
So we've talked a lot about the threats, but what about the opportunities? Could cybersecurity actually be a catalyst for innovation and economic growth in the Middle East?
Absolutely. The cybersecurity industry itself is booming in the region. They're developing their own security solutions, building expertise, attracting investment. It's becoming a hub for cybersecurity innovation.
And it's not just about protecting existing infrastructure, right? The Middle East is also a leader in renewable energy, smart cities, all these cutting-edge technologies. Cybersecurity is going to be crucial for all of that.
Exactly. Think about the Internet of Things. Millions of connected devices in homes, businesses, even entire cities. Securing that infrastructure is paramount. And the Middle East is well positioned to be a leader in this space.
So maybe cybersecurity, rather than being a vulnerability, could actually be a strength for the Middle East, something that sets them apart in the global tech landscape.
I think so. They had the resources, the talent, the motivation to really make a difference. It's an exciting time to be watching this space.
Well, that's a great note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. The threats, the opportunities, the geopolitical complexities. It's clear that Middle East cybersecurity is a topic with global implications.
It is. And it's a topic that's not going away anytime soon. The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to understand the challenges and the potential of this rapidly evolving landscape.
So as you continue to explore this world, here's a final thought for you to ponder. How might the growing use of artificial intelligence in the Middle East impact the future of cybersecurity, both for better and for worse? It's something to keep in mind as we navigate this increasingly digital world. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. This episode of the Endpoints of View podcast has been brought to you by Sentry Bay, home of the armored client, the world's most advanced endpoint protection. For more information, visit sentrybay.com.